Hi, my name is Risa Nelson, and I have the honor of serving as Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of Yale's Afro-American Cultural Center, which we affectionately call the House. I'm pleased to bring to you one of our great virtual offerings for the House's 50th anniversary celebration. In this session, you'll hear from our alumni who have worked around the world in order to connect people across our diaspora through politics and business. They'll share what successful global citizenship means to them and what an increasingly interconnected world means for international work and global leadership. Our session features Bisa Williams, Yale College class of 1976, William Kennard, Yale Law School class of 1981, and Maxine Williams, Yale College class of 1991. Our session is moderated by Wabantu Hlope, Yale College class of 2018. Please be sure to visit our website at www.yaleafm50.com to learn more about this session's amazing speakers. We hope that this session inspires you to strengthen your connection to the House and to each other across our beautifully international community. And we thank you again for joining us in celebrating more than 50 years of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to today's session for the International Politics and Business discussion. I am Wabantu Hlope. I am currently in Nairobi, Kenya, hence it is dark in my particular location. It is very much a pleasure to meet you all and very much an honor to be on this panel discussion with you. I will be your moderator for today's discussion. Quick intro from myself, and then I'll ask you all, starting with Bisa, to introduce yourselves, but very quick introduction from myself. Wabantu, born and raised in Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. It's a bit strange. Small countries, we like to change our names sometimes to keep ourselves interesting. I currently work in renewable energy investment for a company called Cross Boundary Energy in Nairobi. Previously worked for the Boston Consulting Group across the Middle East, South Africa, and East Africa. Co-founded a startup in South Africa, all of that jazz. But most importantly, I graduated from Yale in 2018, so somewhat further away from the end of the Cold War than many of you, but nonetheless graduated from the same school. I was in Brantford. We had the best courtyard. So with that from my end, I'll hand over to Bisa to please introduce herself.
Thank you, Wabantu. I'm really happy to be here. And hello to Maxine and Bill. I'm really happy to see both of you and to meet you actually on this webinar. I am Bisa Williams. I am the class of 72 from JE. Our courtyard wasn't bad, but one of my best friends was in Brantford, and I was talk to him through the window out into that little alleyway. I am a former US diplomat. I was former ambassador to Niger. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Africa and for the Western Hemisphere at one point. I served in the White House for a while. I had a whole career as a US Foreign Service officer. I left the department at the end of 2015 and started a company with my brother, who was the class of 74 from Silliman. And we do a lot of work internationally. I have a contract with the Carter Center. I'm working on the peace agreement in Mali. I also am teaching as of the last year. I started teaching at Yale. So I teach a course on peace building, and in the spring, I'll be teaching a course on the Sahel. So I'll do peace building and the Sahel at the Jackson Institute. And I think I'll end it there so we can have the rest of our discussion.
I suddenly want to go back to college and take that particular class. That sounds really cool. Maxine, please, over to you.
Yes, my name is Maxine Williams, and I find it incredibly interesting that perhaps all three panelists were somehow touched by a Mr. Williams.
Right.
Yeah, where we have William and we have two Williams who, yeah, we will not get into the details, although I think we're probably all familiar with how we could have all ended up with this name. I am from Trinidad and Tobago, and you know, I would assume of all of us, the person from the smallest place, beautiful countries in the Caribbean. I was the class of 92 in Ezra Stiles. Have lived and worked in a number of different countries in a number of different roles. Running a human rights organization in the Caribbean is one of the ones that stands out, working across a number of different issues and a number of different countries in the region. I then went into the diversity and inclusion space, and I am currently the Chief Diversity Officer at a company called Meta, which was formerly known as Facebook.
Great. Okay, another renaming strategy at play. Sorry, Bill, please go ahead.
You're a great moderator. I mean, there's a future for you in this business, I tell you. So again, my name is Bill Kennard. I did not go to Yale College. I'm a graduate of the law school. I graduated from Yale Law School in 1981 and started practicing law, and with the goal of always being in government, public service. But it took me a while to get there. I practiced law for many years, primarily because in the early part of my career, there were no Democrats in the White House. I'm a Democrat and was hoping to be in appointive office. And that happened during the Clinton administration. I became first general counsel and then chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, appointed by Bill Clinton, which was a really wonderful time to have that job because the internet and wireless phones were really exploding onto the scene. And we were able to do a lot of the sort of early policy work that made the internet possible. I left government at the end of the Clinton administration and joined a large private equity fund called the Carlyle Group, where I led investments in the telecom and media space. And then I was very happy doing that and thought I would continue doing it. But then sort of fate intervened, and I met a young senator named Barack Obama who convinced me that he could run and win the presidency. And so I got very involved in his campaign in 2008, and he asked me to serve in his administration, which I did as the US ambassador to the European Union during his first term. Returned to the States in 2013 and founded a private equity fund called Astra Capital, which invests in telecom and media companies. And in my spare time, I serve on the board of trustees of Yale and a number of public companies. I'm a little bit intimidated being on this panel because Maxine and Bisa, I think, are true internationalists. I've had a little taste of it in my career, but I'm here to listen and learn as much as anything.
Well, if you're at all nervous, imagine me. Bisa, yes, you had a thought.
Don't be nervous, Bill. I just realized I had a mind blip. I've been working with my high school reunion, which is the class of 72. I think I said I graduated from Yale in 72, which didn't even have women then, I don't believe. I'm class of 76. So will our editor please say, figure out a way to put that in? Yes. And I graduated.
I think I may have
they
said
can
I
put
was
a little
class of 92. I think I may have said I was class of 92 too, and I'm class of 91. But this is the thing, when you're that many years away from it, as you mentioned, 91, 92, 72, 76, to really make much of a difference.
Right.
We out here.
Okay, yeah, we're here now. That's right.
You got the degree and the correct decade. We can't
Correct.
really ask for much more than that. So again, thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to jump right into the questions, and I'll start with a really easy one. So first and foremost, what does it mean to be a global citizen? And do you consider yourself to be one? And Ambassador Williams, I'll ask you first for your views.
Well, thanks. Yes, I say I consider myself to be a global citizen. I guess it has a lot of meanings for different people. Of course, I've spent most of my career as a US diplomat, so I've been all around the world, literally. But I think being a global citizen also means recognizing that not only is the world, are the countries of the world areas that you can play in, but also work in, but they are I have had the advantage and the privilege of being able to contribute to things. I've had access and continue to have access to people who influence things in the world. And as a global citizen, to the extent that it's been possible, I've used the access that I have to make things better, I think, to make things better, either formally or even informally. And I think whether that's in very small personal ways by creating an opportunity for an individual that they might never have dreamed of, because an American comes to certain issues with a certain open-mindedness that another culture may not, or country may not, or whether it means interjecting myself in an official way, even when I was in government, to demand or to enable the government, the US government, to respond in a way that maybe it hadn't considered. So I think being a global citizen just means recognizing that you can affect things outside of your own particular venue, and you actually have a responsibility to.
I think that's perhaps a wonderful segue into Maxine's experiences coming from a small country like myself.
Yeah.
You've had to de facto interject yourself into the broader world. So what does it mean to be a global citizen in your case? And do you identify with being a global citizen?
I do. And I think I would just take Bisa's definition a little step further to say that I also think it means that you have the right to, that you are entitled to have a say in what goes on in this world. And then I think there is a sort of related piece about opportunity, which is what I think often gets in the way of one's right to exercise that global citizenship, because we all don't have the same amount of opportunity to do so, right? Some people have more access and more movement and more agency than others. So I think in an ideal world, we would all be global citizens and see ourselves that way and be able to exercise that right. The world is not ideal currently, which is actually part of what gives me excitement around what technology is capable of doing, that we can in fact be where we want to be physically and have more access to more other places and more agency, and then perhaps have our entitlement be something that we can act on more. So you mentioned me from a small place. Like, I was very happy and love my small place and love my culture, and love my people and the family and everything around. Yeah, but like my small place didn't give me enough access to other opportunities. And I therefore, had to leave, whether it was educational opportunities or opportunities for work. And so you can feel yourself as a global citizen, but not be able to act on it. And what I see happening, which is what I'm excited about in technology, is we are beginning to create ways in which more people can do that. So we can all sort of close that gap between how we see ourselves and what we can actually do. So I think there's more to come on how we can exercise that right as global citizens.
Okay, and of course, as a technology expert, Bill, in your own right, having chaired the FCC, I imagine you have some thoughts as well on the role that technology is playing in closing that gap. But I want to also start with your perspective on what it means to be a global citizen and whether you identify as one.
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that my co-panelists said. I thought those were all great answers. I guess I think of it more as sort of akin to the philosophy of natural rights, that sort of understanding that all people on the planet have a certain inherent dignity and worth and right to live freely on the planet. And people I've met who I think are real global citizens recognize that, and they empathize with that. In fact, I've met people who've lived all over the globe. I wouldn't say they're great global citizens because they don't necessarily empathize, and they don't have an ability to see the world through the eyes of others. Conversely, I've met people who haven't traveled or lived abroad, who have great compassion and empathy for the rights of others. So to me, it's more of a mindset than a set of experiences. I
think I'm struck by your use of the phrase "seeing the world through other people's eyes," and I think brings me to my second question. Of course, on this Zoom call, we have the particular fact that we're all people of color, and having opportunity to travel the world and see different parts of the world, we've got the opportunity to see ourselves as people of color through the eyes of others, but also see how other people of color understand themselves and their identity and their contexts. So as people of color who've worked around or with the world, what are the most important lessons that you have learned about your Blackness abroad, however you may define and understand that term? And we'll start with Maxine.
Gosh, I think it is both universal and contextual. So growing up in a country where most people were Black or brown, what my Blackness meant there was not the same as what it means when I'm in the minority, when I'm in the United States or when I'm in Europe. But at the same time, right, I've traveled all through India. And when I would say to people I was Black, it didn't mean anything to them because again, it's quite contextual, and Black is also sort of a political definition, and certainly it's a social one. And if you're out of context there, then people are confused. It doesn't mean the same thing. And at the same time, when I say it's quite universal, what I know is that the experience, and you are from the continent, I am not, right? I'm part of the diaspora, and the transatlantic slave trade, which made me possible, is one which has also caused a sort of a universe, or it has been part of this sort of universal, I think, devaluation of Blackness, however you see it. And I see that as universal, even in countries which have majority people of color, right, in some pockets. So it is a very interesting thing where you can see some common understandings wherever you go. I think the power structure across the world, which has created a hierarchy, is something that you see reflected everywhere. And at the same time, Blackness can be quite contextual. And I feel that quite so. Now, because I spend most of my time in countries where I am in the minority and where there is this sort of embedded discrimination and that hierarchy I talked about, from day to day, most of how I see it as being a member of a group that is, as I said, undervalued, discriminated against, a group where we are constantly fighting the battle to be, we just talked about dignity and the importance of that as, as global citizens, to claim this dignity and to cause others to treat us in that way. So it's a quite complex thing, I would say. As I said, contextual and universal.
I think that is a very powerful way of viewing it. My own experiences in Kenya so far have certainly showed me that even though I arrived and told people when I was asked that I'm Black, their reaction was, you look Kikuyu to us, which is the dominant tribe here, which was their primary understanding of anyone that looks even remotely like them. So I can understand that perspective very, very, very deeply. Bill, I'd like to get your thoughts as well. What is the greatest lesson that you've learned about your Blackness abroad?
Well, I think it's similar to what both of you just said. It's the universality of discrimination. It's almost part of the human condition in some ways, and we always have to be aware that it's there, even when we sometimes forget that it's there. And then one experience I had, which was really, I felt this acutely, when I was serving as the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, during President Obama's first term, and of course he was wildly popular in Europe, and during his first term, being his ambassador there was a really heady experience because, the doors opened and they were so delighted to have you, and meeting with all the heads of state and the other ambassadors. But one day I decided that I would slip away from my security detail and take a run in my neighborhood. And so I left the ambassador's residence, which is a big compound outside Brussels, and I was stopped by two Belgian police officers who, did one of these, up against the wall kinds of things, and I'm patted down. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want them to know who I was. And, here I was, one of the highest ranking Americans in Europe, but on a Saturday morning in a jogging suit, I'm just another Black guy in a rich white neighborhood, and I'm a target. And so, you just realize that it's a constant struggle against these forces that are trying to dehumanize us and keep us down. And, we have to, notwithstanding all our successes, we must never forget that, that we're victims of this sort of thing.
Certainly feels like an inescapable burden to some degree. Ambassador Williams, your thoughts?
Thank you. I of course agree both with Maxine and Bill, who have expressed everything 100% eloquently. I'd like to add that it's interesting. Blackness is also, well, as Maxine said, contextual, but it's relative until it isn't, as Bill, like Bill said, until it isn't anymore. At the same time, I did notice in my foreign travels, first of all, Maxine, I want to tell you, the first time I was in a country where everybody was brown and black around me was in Trinidad. My father had a long lost sister that he rediscovered and went there, and that was a moment of change for me, really, because everybody around, and you felt proud, like pride, it's like this is their country. So anyway, that's a different story. But when I was in Mauritius, another brown country, black and brown country in Africa, predominantly Indian, but with a lot of 7% African descendant, let's say, in their population. I was just the number 2 in the small but important American embassy. And the newspapers were actually controlled by the Creole elite, and the Creoles in Mauritius are mixtures of African and Indian and African and French. And at first I didn't understand, why do they keep putting my picture? Every time I turn around, I was in the newspaper. And then I realized it was their way of promoting, look at, this is a Black woman's success. This is a Black American woman's success. And I was riding to work one day, and the school bus was right next to me, and all the girls were crowding at the window, pointing at me. So even though, yeah, we are victims and we're fighting this issue, we know we've got this weight on us, we can also we're such an inspiration, even in other countries of color. American diplomats talk about the story. There was a Coptic child right after Obama was elected. I mean, this is not like a ghost story. This is a real story. I know the people who are telling me this. And he said, look, Dad, Obama made it to president. You think there'll ever be a Coptic president of Egypt? The guy said, no. So there's an aspect of who we are, what we can do in this new world, or what we have done. I think that's changing now, because you're seeing a whole lot of more African children of Africa now who are having their voices heard. But certainly for my generation, and up until I'd say until like the 2010s, that was less the case. So there's that aspect of what it means being Black around the world that also is undeniable.
Yeah, one of the things that just hearing you all talk has made me think about is, I know, as we share on this panel, there are going to be younger people who have not graduated yet, who are still at Yale, who may see this, and people who are thinking about how they spend their lives, and the value of traveling, the value of getting that understanding, having those moments of aha, right, is so incredible, because you can only read about it so much, right? And it makes you so much of a better global citizen when you have actually visited and been in it and known what it is like. You talk about the inspiration that you were to people in Mauritius, but that did something to you to have been that inspiration, right? Or you going to Trinidad and for the first time being around people who were all Black and brown, and this was their country. And that does something to you. I remember coming to Yale, and I remember the first person, Chris Rabb, shout out, that I met, who was a Black person who wasn't from the Caribbean, or didn't have roots in the Caribbean. And I remember asking Chris, I said, yeah, but where are your people from? Okay, but where were they from before that? Right, because for me, like, all roads would lead back to one of the islands, or Brazil, where most of the people who were enslaved went, right? I mean, I don't think even people realize that. The most enslaved people did not go to America, right?
To North America, right? They went,
They didn't. And so, like, all of that, but like, as you travel, right, and you go to Brazil and you see, like, whoa, this country is 54% Black people, right? People of African descent. I've been evicted twice in my life. One was in a Black country, one was in a white country, and both were because of the same assumptions about Blackness versus whiteness, quite frankly, when I talk about that hierarchy, right? So even in a Black country, people still see a certain set of, the power is still the same globally, And so you can also be treated badly in a Black country. So, I mean, there's just so much to be learned and understood. And I think to help people as they develop themselves in their careers and their personal lives to this living in the globe, if one has access and opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. And I think your story reminds me very briefly of, I moved to Yale at the height of the Ebola crisis. And I arrived at Yale and there was conversations about, should we ban travel from Africa?
Right.
I pointed out to some of my classmates that I was from a country that straight line distance was further away from the Ebola crisis than Yale physically was in that moment. And I think traveling and getting to understand what a 16-hour flight means is something that is very important to people's perception and understanding of just how far away other parts of the Black universe and the Black world can really be. But I want to move backwards a little bit to Bisa's point about being an inspiration. And I'm thinking more about inspirations to each of you. The list of Black heroes is often limited in Western media, art, popular culture, with those from the broader diaspora who are not named Nelson Mandela typically being ignored. Nelson Mandela, of course, legendary, but there are other important South Africans as a starting point, maybe Trevor Noah. So what I wanted to know was, who are your personal heroes from other parts of the diaspora, and why do they inspire you? And here I'd love perhaps Bill to start off.
Sure. Well, I think when I think of heroes in my lifetime, I think of people who have led incredible movements to liberate their countries. You mentioned Mandela; he's obviously one, but when you think of the last 100 years and the fight against colonialization in Africa and other parts of the world, each of those movements had incredible leaders, whether it was Kenyatta or Nkrumah or Nyerere, and there are thousands more. And because this history is not taught often, we don't know so many of them. But there have been times in our lifetime where you see incredible movements for liberation and human determination. And, that was very current in Africa in the first half of the last century. But they weren't limited to Africa, right? You had the color revolutions in Eastern Europe and the Arab Spring and what's happening in Ukraine today. And each of these moments in history produces people of great brilliance and courage and leadership. And I guess the short answer is I admire them all because they have, to quote Steve Jobs, they put a dent in the universe. They changed the world as we know it. And they don't get enough credit, frankly.
Yeah.
Bisa, please go ahead.
It's really interesting. I travel in Africa a lot. And so it's true, every country you go to, throughout the continent, you will see the mural or some kind of a tribute to the heroes of the anti-colonial movement, the independent movements in Africa. And a lot of those murals, the paint is chipping away now, or the statues are sort of getting musty, because in 2022 or things did not progress. The ideal was not realized in most of those cases, and so I'm always struck by what those men and those issues in that period, predominantly men, what strength they represent. But at the same time, I'm also struck by where we are now in different places in Africa. So as you talk about heroes, I'm thinking more contemporary because I'll just tell you, there is a young Nigerian architect. I was on a little podcast, so I've mentioned her before, but I'm just going to mention her again because I think she's brilliant. Her name is Mariam Kamara with a K. She's Nigerian, but she's married to a Senegalese, and so her name is Kamara. And her designs are all green. She does environmentally sound construction, all Afrocentric. She puts so much energy into studying a culture and the history of a people before she goes to work. And she creates beautiful architecture, beautiful pieces that are engaged in conversation with the community where they're built. Everything from a market that she built in this area, this remote area, that looked like little parasols and the wind could go through. Her designs are lovely and relevant to the community. And you know it's Mariam Kamara when you see it. And she did another construction of a library and a mosque in conversation with each other, sort of to reinforce the notion that education and learning is not antithetical to Islam. Anyway, I love her work, Mariam Kamara. Another hero I have is the current, she's like the deputy spokesperson at the White House. I just love her, Karine Jean-Pierre. She's Haitian descent. And every time she opens her mouth, it's poetry. It's just, she's on point. She's poised. I am not as poised and on point all the time, but so I love that in a person. I think she's amazing. And I've never met her. I know Mariam, but I've never met Corinne, but I just love it anytime she shows up. And at the risk of appearing to have clientitis, which I don't think I have, but maybe I do. I want to say that the current president of Niger is poised to be one of my heroes. He's, in a way, he's his own minority there. He's Arab descendant Nigerian. He's ethnic Arab Nigerian, which in their ethnic groupings is one of the smallest ethnic groups. But I mean, he's 100% nationalist Nigerian. But he's a man with a vision who's really unafraid to talk about his vision. He can be kind of lecturing. He's very intellectual, but he's always on point and he's unafraid, and he'll tell it to the Americans, he'll tell it to the French, he tells it to his own people. He seems to be on this really anti-corruption thing, but he's got a very clear vision of how he wants to lift his country up, educate his people. I find him inspiring. His name is Mohammed Bazoum. I forgot to say his name. So anyway, those were three people that I would mention.
I mean, I think that's an incredible list. I must say that as someone on the call with an African passport, my tendency is to be highly skeptical of leaders when they're young and haven't. So I will wait personally until he's
new president. I mean,
until he steps down peacefully, because in the case of Swaziland, we're still waiting for our liberation leader. But that will come hopefully later on. Maxine, I'd love to hear your hero or heroes.
Yeah, I think what's important is, as we define hero, is that we accept that once we name a human being, we have to make it such that being a hero does not mean that person is perfect. So you're just, mentioning what's to come. We will never know what's to come, but we also don't know everything about what has been for any human being, right? So all sorts of things can be uncovered that we didn't know before. So I think as we think about who our heroes or heroines are, we should be thinking about, are there things that these people have done which have been inspirational, which have benefited others, which have added value to the world? There may be also other things that don't fall under those three umbrellas, and we have to sort of appreciate that. So with that caveat, I would say that I mentioned one from the past and one who is current. I was very, very interested when I was at Yale with the history of Haiti. And in fact, I ultimately created my own major, special divisional major in Caribbean studies. I did that. Because I felt that you could study American studies and get a degree, European studies, and there was even African studies, but there was no Caribbean studies track. Mm-hmm. And so luckily there is this special divisional major. You can put together the syllabus. If you get a supervisor to guide you through, if there are enough courses to make it work, you can do it. I did that and got through. So my BA is in Caribbean studies. But a big part of that was studying Haiti. Because here's the thing, the whole of Haiti is my heroine. I'm in awe of. If I had to pick a name, then we could go to Toussaint Louverture. But as a symbol of what Haiti did, what the Haitian people did for all of us,
Yes.
And that is a place and an area where I don't think most people understand. Even Black people understand what we owe to Haiti. So Haiti being the only country of enslaved people, which by revolution, like won their freedom back, right? And not through negotiation in the same way. And when they did it was phenomenal, and how they did it and what they've had to pay for it. But because they did it, it then caused all of this, some good and some bad. So I would argue that Black codes in the United States of America were the result of the fear that what happened in Haiti would then come to America, because in fact, people did move information and people between the countries, right? And so word had come that Black people, enslaved people, had won somewhere. And had claimed their freedom for themselves. And that then brought fear, which then led to, well, we need harsher codes and harsher. So much of what happened in Haiti influenced what happened, but it also inspired. It inspired people everywhere to know that maybe we could be free. Maybe we could gain that. Yeah. So the whole country of Haiti is a hero to me. And yes, if I had to take a name, let's go with Toussaint. And then in terms of contemporary, there is a woman who leads a country called Barbados. It is an even smaller country than mine. It is an adjacent country. Her name is Mia Amor Motley. And this small country, about 300,000 people, small landmass, but boy, what a force to be reckoned with. She is bright. She is committed, she is progressive, she is forward thinking. If you were to look up her speeches at COP to see how she's describing the impact of climate change and the demands that those who contribute most to the degradation of our climate should be those who pay for it the most, right? So small countries, small island states will suffer the most, but they don't contribute to what's happening. And so like just sort of navigating through that and making the demands. And when you come from a small place, sometimes you cannot feel you have the right to stand there and demand so. But again, being a global citizen, and if you understand your entitlement and you have the agency and you can execute, it's quite a powerful thing to watch. So Mia Motley is another heroine of mine.
Before you go to your next question, Vantu, I've got to ask Maxine, because since you mentioned Haiti, I have my own issue, I also was a Division IV major, so I did literature of the New World. So anyway, but I think that the term boogeyman comes from that rebellion done by Bukraman that was in Haiti. And I don't know enough about the etymology, but I sort of think that when I read that in C.L.R. James's account,
oh yes,
I think that that's where we get that term from, and I would love somehow to do some kind of study from that. But
I'm sure somebody on this who's viewing this, one of these brilliant scholars,
because
get the answer to that for us.
I think it, be careful, because in the South and the United States, be careful because the boogeyman might come. He might come and slaughter and chop off all the heads of all the white people they're sleeping. So anyway,
when I graduated from Yale in '91, I went to live in Haiti and work in Haiti as well. And then went back many times as part of UN missions and other things. Fascinating place.
Yeah.
I think, Peter, you've just given a student their senior thesis.
So
thank you. Thank you very much on their behalf. Very briefly, my heroes, Angela Davis, because I think to be that extraordinarily brave in the face of a system that is that capable of ending your life and your existence, and then also destroying your legacy, is powerful in and of its own right. And secondly, Samora Machel, because much like Haiti, to defeat in his particular case, and his movement's case, the Portuguese army mechanized fully on African soil and terrify the apartheid government in the process, is something that I think even in Southern African history is not a story told loud enough. So with that, and I think I've mentioned a fair number of leftists. So I think it's fine to add another leftist and a quote by a leftist, probably like the most left-leaning of all of them, but nonetheless, the quote goes, "There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen." And that was Lenin, not John Lennon, the Russian one. So, and that phrase I think is that quote is particularly powerful in the context of the last few years, perhaps this particular moment, conflicts in Ethiopia, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, civil unrest, the Black Lives Matter protests, protests against gender-based violence in South Africa, democratic movements even in little old Swaziland, and so on and so forth. The world is just emerging from a pandemic, but it feels like decades have been happening weekly for the last 2 years. So what I want to know from each of you is, what do you feel are the key factors that are reshaping the world around us and causing all of this turmoil and chaos? And then secondly, how do you feel you are redefining your leadership, or how do you see leadership being redefined to deal with those issues? Perhaps not the easiest question I've asked today, but very curious to hear your thoughts nonetheless. Maxine, I'll start with you.
I would say there are different causes to those different types of chaos you've just mentioned. Look, at the center of them all is people, right? That's what connects it all. And I think as we sort of say, well, what's a major factor at play here? I'm thinking about for the positive, right? So we already know we have the chaos, but how do we navigate through the chaos? And what does that mean for the future? And this is where I come back to the role that technology can play. So for instance, right, the biggest chaos of the last couple of years has been this pandemic. And boy, did it make us understand how connected we are to each other. That no matter how much we think, all of these different power dynamics that we talk about couldn't save anyone, right? Like, it was coming everywhere. And we were all now in this state where, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, where we had to physically isolate in the way that we did. And we saw through that how much people want to be connected to each other, because when it was taken away from you, you wanted it the same. And that's the irony, right? When I say people cause the chaos between people, but at the same time, when people cannot be together, there's a deprivation that we experience there. So it's very, very interesting how much we want the closeness, the connection, and we want presence with each other. And I think as we see what technology can do to deliver that presence, we will start to see where the opportunities will come as well. So one of the things that has changed is that people are now so much more open to, where it is possible, remote work, right? It's something people have been talking about for a long time. When we think about the climate, like, wouldn't it be better if we didn't have so many people on the highways every day driving to a place where they had to put their bodies in the same space as somebody else, but they could stay from home and connect using technology and save all of that, right? Now people are much more open to it, and the technology is getting to the point where we can do it with much more facility. So does that mean there will be less chaos on the environment in the future? I think this is all a very interesting new space. We talked about building the metaverse, but we've said it'll take maybe a decade before it's at the point where we can say, oh, this is a world in which you really can have economic opportunity and educational opportunities, and where you don't need to get on a plane and go for that one meeting that you might have done before, but we can feel as present using this technology, and then that makes changes in the world. So I think it's actually quite an interesting moment now as we build the mechanisms for people to feel present with each other and to think about whether that will, in fact, help us to reduce some of the chaos.
Okay, and Ambassador Williams, what do you think is behind some of this chaos, as Maxine puts it, and how do you see yourself redefining leadership to address it?
It's interesting. I see the flip side. I agree again with Maxine. The flip side of the connectivity that I saw had in the cyber field had to do with how easy it is to influence and manipulate people cyber-wise. We saw with our elections, we saw in Eastern Europe, you saw efforts to really take over governments cyber-wise, if you ask the Estonians and things. But so I think the whole notion that cyberspace and the possibilities, as well as the challenges that that are in that field, I think that's creating part of this chaos or something new. I also think that there is a huge disillusionment with our notion of liberal democracy, because it has not delivered. It has not delivered on its promise, and people are tired of it. But where that's going, I think, is a big challenge. I think it's changing, the way leaders are responding. You're seeing some who are trying to meet the moment, and others who are meeting the moment by comfortably fitting into soft autocracy. That's what I think is happening in certain parts of Africa. Some of our favorite friends are sort of slipping into this soft autocratic revision of constitutions and all kinds of palaver that is just a cover for old-fashioned tyranny. But we're not, as a global community, we haven't figured out our responses yet. If Cote d'Ivoire wants to sort of tingle around with its constitution, well, we know he's a good guy. He worked for the World Bank. He's smart. He's this, that, and the other thing. We won't say too much right now. And if Chad doesn't, but at the same time, what we don't know what the responses are yet, or apparently we don't know what they should be. Or as a global community, all of us aren't being heard. And actually, it's not that all of us aren't being heard. I do think that people are trying to figure out what can be a more just and economically viable, sustaining understanding of community for us. I think that's part of what's happening. So the cyber insecurity part is a concern for me. This disillusionment with liberal democracy and the ill-defined or undefined what's next aspect. On another level, again, I spend so much time in that former space. I apologize, but I do think that that Russia's militarization in Africa, I think, is a bad thing. And right now it might be only in 2 or 3 places, but that doesn't mean it can't spring up other places. I think they're wreaking havoc in CAR. I think they're wreaking havoc in parts of Mali. And maybe even some other places, but I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that. And I also, I find a change doesn't have to be negative, but a new factor that we should all contend with has to do with the way that China's grown its new confidence on the world stage, which is a good thing. At the same point, its strategy or its intentions for me are less clear, but the fact that it is exerting a role, I think, is important. So, and
I think at the bare minimum, Ambassador Williams, Francis Fukuyama's claim in, I think, 94 that we had reached the end of history was very decidedly wrong. It seems like history starting all over again. A new Cold War, a new competition between the great powers. I think what you have spoken to is entirely valid, and I think speaks to many of the complexities of the world in which we now live. And I would really hope that more people were aware of, say, Russian intervention in the Central African Republic, et cetera, so forth. That's something I think is well worth discussing. I see Wendy points out that we've got about 15 minutes left on the calendar hold, so I want to keep it moving on. But I'd love to hear, Bill, your thoughts on what is driving the chaos, as it were, and how you understand leadership potentially being redefined to deal with these new challenges, or perhaps all challenges reborn.
Well, I've always prided myself on being a pretty optimistic person, but I must say that when I look around the world today, I'm not as optimistic as I once was. I mean, all of us on this call grew up studying foreign policy, where we were all taught that there was a certain inevitability of liberal democracy, that people wanted to liberate themselves. They wanted free and open markets and democracy and transparency in government. And we're finding out that is a wonderful aspiration, but the assumptions that we had, particularly with respect to Russia and China, that they would become increasingly open and democratic, were just wrong, right? And so I think that the challenges that I'm seeing around the world with the rise of, as Bisa said, autocracies and right-wing nationalism, these trends are quite powerful, and they're being accelerated by shocks to the global system. It started with the financial crisis and then the pandemic. The pandemic is leading to really scary inflation. And then, of course, the conflict with Ukraine is going to touch off a lot of deprivation in parts of the world where people are going to become very susceptible to autocrats. And so I think as a leader, I'm starting to really challenge some of the basic assumptions that I have grown up with about the inevitability of markets and countries becoming more open. Is that we sort of assumed that there would be, particularly after the wall fell, that there would be a sort of trajectory toward openness and democracy. But we realized that in Russia in particular, Putin found that he didn't want to be interconnected with the global economy. He really wanted, he found it was easier to lead his country through a kleptocracy. He didn't diversify his economy, and the world is going to suffer for that. So I think all of us who are in a position, as we all are, to talk to young people and give them advice, I think they have to be prepared for a much more fragile global environment. And Maxine, I loved your statement about technology. And you and I have spent our careers in technology, but we're seeing the internet become balkanized.
Yes.
It is being the internet that we all sort of took for granted, that it would be this wonderful global network and everyone would be communicated and connected. That is not happening now. It's reversing itself. And it's a scary time. And I think we have to be honest with young people to say that the kind of economic growth and peace and prosperity that we enjoyed throughout our careers is probably not going to be the same for them. And they need to prepare themselves for that. Sorry to end on the whole note. The way I feel.
I'm almost searching for the right segue, because that's a difficult one you left me with there, Bill, to pick up and try to pivot. I'm part of me wants to ask a little bit more about this point about technology, because it seems that everybody's wanting to discuss it a bit more, because I think it is very much been in the headlines. Is technology playing a negative role in our understanding of our own societies, our own democracies? But at the same time, without technology, would the Black Lives Matter movement have caught fire the way that it did and reshaped society? I would contend for everybody on this call, we would view that as a net positive. At the same time, with digital divides, I'm still in a part of the world where, physically right now, I'm in a part of the world, most people don't have access to the internet. And what access they do have is maybe through services like WhatsApp, Telegram, etc., where they're receiving very small snippets of information rather than the larger story. And so I guess maybe the question I have for all of you is, how do you engage with media via sort of social networks, via the internet, and how do you pass out what is true and what is not? And I realize that this is unrelated to some of the points that we've discussed before, but I think it's topical, and I feel like it's something that seems a strong perspective or a strong interest from everybody on the call. And so I'd be super curious to understand how perhaps do you do it, and how do you suggest other people do it, if at all? And we'll start with Maxine.
So that you asked some real big questions there. We don't have all the time to go through all of that. Look, what I would say is that I actually think it's going to sound weird to say things haven't changed that much, in so far as it used to be that we had access to very little information. So we would have to take what we had. It just came through a different means, right? I grew up when there was one television station, and you watched what there was, and they told one story, and only rich people got the opportunity to tell their stories. Like, yes, if you were Donald Trump, you could have enough money to take out a full page ad in the New York Times, and then you would tell the story you wanted through that. Other people didn't have that opportunity. And so what we've seen now is that we are in a place where there are more opportunities, there are more sources, but what you've pointed out is that some people may only go to one source, but more sources do exist. So we may find ourselves in a place where people are still only checking one source. Or I do think there is an issue of, given that there is the opportunity, there are more sources available for each of us to exercise some agency to cross-reference. So how I do it is I deliberately look for sources which I know are counter to my political leanings. I want to see what's the other way of thinking about this or looking at this, right? But I do that because I want to broaden. The way we can do that, you're going to have a balance between people and their independent agency and how they want to conduct their lives. Do they want constant cross-referencing? And then some of what we can put in place in technology to help guide them to that. So for instance, we have features which, you talked about WhatsApp, that limit the amount of people you can send things to. That is in an effort to limit the spread of misinformation. But if there is something which, is actually you want everybody to know, for instance, during the pandemic, we built COVID information centers where we put credible information that everybody could go and find. Or we have fact checkers that put a notice saying this has been fact checked and doesn't look quite right. No, you can still choose to read it, right? But you've been warned. I think there are just going to be so many ways in which we get to this. But in the end, individuals, I think, have an opportunity now that there are more sources of information, to do that cross-checking, and through that to figure out for yourself what you believe, what you don't believe, what you think has enough supporting evidence to make it true. Whereas in the past, as I said, we actually didn't have that opportunity, and we still only had very few sources of information.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. And I see, Bisa, you're nodding your head, so I'll let you share some of your thoughts, and then I'll swap over to our concluding question.
I have much less to say on this subject. I agree, but I'm a wary person in that it's true that like cell phones and technology leapfrogged over a lot of the phases that we had to go through in order to get there, for example. But but a lot of the world is illiterate, is what I'm trying to get to. They can use some of this technology, and they can hear certainly podcasts, all kinds of stuff. But I'm concerned about this gap between that 5-minute or 10-minute soundbite and knowledge, and how that gap lends itself to manipulation. So I'm not the greatest person on social media or any of those media. Anybody that tries to find me on LinkedIn or anything will see that. But I mean, I'm there, but I might as well not be. But I understand it's important. I understand it's important. I understand I need to get better at it, all that kind of stuff. I do not understand how people can get their news from the media. I'm actually the wrong person to speak on this. And I think Bill and Maxine, as Williams, representatives in some kind of way, are much better on that. So I'll just.
Understandable. No, I thought, again, that everybody seemed to feel somewhat passionate or curious about the points. I thought it best to let everybody discuss and share their thoughts. I will now go to the last question, which I think, Maxine, you spoke to tangentially earlier on, which was, we don't have the audience with us today, but potentially the people who will be watching this are currently young people at Yale, potentially beyond. And they may be people who are interested in developing some of the international experiences that all three of you have. But they're perhaps fearful or unsure, given everything that's happened. Maybe you move to Ukraine and Russia invades, or you move to Swaziland and suddenly there's pro-democracy protests, or whatever the case may be. So they're unsure how best to pursue these international experiences. The question I have to each of you is, what advice would you offer to them to encourage them to take the plunge, the leap of faith, whatever you want to call it, or the step beyond the comfortable? Bill, I'll hand over to you first to share your thoughts.
Well, this may sound trite, but the best advice is just do it, right? And the one thing I advise young people to do is try to find people in your life who you admire and emulate, and try to be like them. And everyone I've met who has lived abroad and been intellectually curious about people around the world they tend to lead really rich, fulfilling lives. Just traveling around the world makes you just so much more informed and enriches your experiences. And living abroad, where you actually meet people from other cultures and immerse yourself, you find that your life is just so much more interesting and rewarding. And the fears that I confront oftentimes when I advise young people is that they're worried about, they want to make money, right? They don't want to get off that career track, and they don't want to leave the law firm or the investment bank, and and they don't want to do public service because they're chasing that brass ring. And so oftentimes I'll tell people, I mean, my own career, I've done 2 stints in public service. I did some time in the private sector. My life is just so much richer than if I had not been able to travel and live abroad. And I think if they just follow the example of others, perhaps they'll summon the courage to do it.
Bisa, I'll ask you for your thoughts.
I agree with that. The idea is to go ahead and take the plunge. There are all kinds of opportunities. Companies all are interested in people with foreign experience. There are internships. NGOs are working internationally. The idea is to just, if you have the idea, if you have the curiosity, follow it. You don't know what opportunities will come as a consequence. I could never have told anybody at Yale that I'd be teaching at Yale today, when I was a student. So you just have to go for it, follow. And they are, if nothing ventured, nothing gained. Isn't that the expression? So you must travel, you must try it. Go for it.
All right, and the final word, Maxine.
My rule of thumb was always, as long as I can pay for my own rent, as long as I can find my own accommodation and put food in my mouth, then I didn't have to answer to anybody. When I did Caribbean studies, my mother was like, "What is that? How are you going to make a living with that? What are you doing?" It's on. I would always look and say, "Wait, did I ask you for any? No. Okay, well then I'm going to do this." Same thing with the traveling, right? I know people have this, "I want to start making money," but you have so much time to make money. Well, I mean, do you have enough? If you can figure out a way, whether it is through joining something like an overseas mission, like the Peace Corps, or I know people who went to teach in China, or there are so many different ways in which you can get enough to cover your expenses, yet have the invaluable experience of being in a different country. I promise you that what you will be able to cash that in for later, talk about leapfrogging, is so much more than if you went straight out into the grind, hoping that you will be a creative person who has world vision, who can, bring the cognitive diversity to bear to make you a much more valuable player in whatever industry you go into. So taking the time to explore the world and to learn more is absolutely going to pay off for you in the future. So if you have the opportunity to do it and put food in your belly and have somewhere to sleep with a roof over your head at night, I would say go do it, get that passport and start.
So Maxine, next time these young people come to me for advice, I'm going to give them your phone number, because that was really
Absolutely. Send them all to Meta.
Absolutely.
Very, very compelling. And also your mother's reaction to Caribbean studies was precisely my mom's reaction when I said I'm moving to Kenya. She said, "Where? Why? What's happening in Kenya that's not happening in Dubai? And could you not do it from there?" So entirely understandable. Well, I think that exactly on time brings us to the end of today's call. Thank you so much, Maxine, Bill, Bisa, for your time and your thoughts and your patience with me with the discussion. It's incredibly invaluable, and I'm sure everybody that watches will learn a great many things. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I think that brings us to the end of today's conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Good luck, everyone.
Cheers, everybody.